After following for hours, Jarvis makes it to just outside of Michigan, limping from the multiple wounds and bruises he has received. He can hear something rushing down behind him. He ducks into the bushes, spotting a hearse speeding past him, and into a tree slightly diagonally to the right front of him, hearing Henry's voice shouting, "Where did you learn to drive?" Edna's voice speaks up.
You try driving after having to put your rotten head back together piece by piece on my charred body.
Rufus speaks up.
Let me take the fucking wheel.
Jarvis slowly sneaks up on the vehicle. Back at the S-Mart integration, Jedediah finishes.
And through expanding the door, I was able to transport myself into the past.
Davy responds by saying,
So time travel.
Raoul then shouts with delight.
Going back to the future?
Jedediah then, in realization, says,
Oh yeah, Back to the Future exists.
He then turns to Malcolm and says,
I completely forgot about Back to the Future.
Raoul then says,
Eric Stoltz is awesome as Marty McFly.
Jedediah puts his hands together and simply answers,
No comment. Anyway, all the other times I had done this, I went back in time from here to here, changing everything after this point. But somehow, something I did released enough power to ricochet off these other narratives, merging and distorting the timelines past, present, and future. Kind of like Land of the Lost now that I think of it.
Madeline Rothschild answers,
Your train of thought sounds very similar to a passage from the Necronomicon, The Glidpont Effect. But it's not possible?
Jedediah replies.
Why is that?
She answers back.
Because we wouldn't be here. The timeline merge would start and end like the snap of my fingers. Anyone from a different narrative would return to their home reality, and anyone native to this narrative would be erased.
Jedediah replies.
So the world isn't ending.
Malcolm replies.
That can be explained by someone with great power keeping the corrupted narrative intact.
Madeline shakes her head and stares.
Someone with that much power wouldn't exist.
They knew me.
Jedediah replies, everyone in his group knowing what he meant.
Whoever sent them, if they knew me and knew I would show up at the mortuary, then...
Ash leans in and says,
So I had a life where I was from, and because you wanted to save your mommy, I lost it.
He looks on in nervousness and replies.
Well, when you put it like that...
He's then socked in the jaw by Ash's middle hand. He shouts out,
You have any idea how much your selfishness cost good people all these years? I thought it was all my fault. I took too many drops of the potion and slept too long. But it was you. If your mom was still alive, she'd probably hate you for what you did.
Jedediah rises up, rubbing his jaw, and he gives a look of rage as Ash chuckles, saying,
No wonder you're so sensitive. Your mommy held you on the teat.
He is then punched in the nose. He gives a look of rage as Jedediah responds.
Jaguar.
Ash jumps over the table and ramming Jedediah into the wall, punching him in the face. While getting punched, Jedediah spots keys attached to Ash's belt and reaches. After a few more punches, a door click and a swing, they both roll out into a stairwell, rolling. Madeline asks,
Should we stop them?
Jennifer replies,
We'll wait until your boyfriend is about to kill him, then we stop it. He deserves this.
Everyone looks at her petrified. After rolling down the stairs, Ash lands across from Jedediah, who then quickly jumps on him, taking his metal hand and punching his sides repeatedly. Jedediah quickly spots a buckle holding the glove to his stump hand. He reached and unhooks it. After Ash reaches up looking at his stump in shock, Jedediah head butts the elder backwards. He takes his metal hand and chucks it below them into the lower floors. Jedediah breathes in with Ash stating,
You didn't improve your situation much.
And he charges at Jedediah, knocking him over the step railing onto a car. He lands hard, gasping for air, then rolls off the car, hitting the floor below. He bleeds from his mouth, spitting it out as Ash parkours on the car, then jumping on the ground with Jedediah stating,
Show off.
as Ash rushes him into a pillar, holding a stump on Jedediah's neck, punching him in the face with his normal hand, only slightly softer than the metal one. Jedediah kicks him in the nuts, dropping him down as he crashes, gasping for air. Ash held his nuts from the pain. Jedediah jumps on him, grabbing him by the head, slamming it to the ground. After a few slams, Ash puts his heels under Jedediah's guy and kicks him into the wall. Dropping him, Ash slowly gets up and walks off. As Jedediah breathes heavily as the revving of a chainsaw is heard, he turns to see Ash with a chainsaw for a hand, raises it over his head, about to cut Jedediah in two. He breathes heavily, with Jedediah wanting his last words to stick, and says,
I never heard of Linda, but she had poor taste if you have to kill me just to prove how big you are. Probably because your dick is the size of a trout.
About to slam it down, he is telekinetically chucked aside into the ground, his chainsaw shutting off, with Madeline using her hands to hold him in place. Jennifer saying,
That's enough.
Ash breathes heavily, with Madeline walking up to him and shakes her head. Ash replying,
This fucker is the reason the world went to shit.
I don't care. Don't act like you wouldn't have done something similar if you had that power.
Jennifer holds out her hand to Jedediah, and he takes it. She pulls him up as he tries to thank her.
I can't even...
She punched him in the face.
I deserve that.
She punched him again.
That too.
She is about to punch him in the nuts as he holds his hands.
No, not that one.
Jennifer breathes heavily and says,
To think about all the time we spent together, thinking maybe if your dad was alive, how you would have ended up.
He looks up in shame as she states,
You're the exact same self-pity prick.
And she walks off as Jedediah wipes his mouth and says,
And you were a bad friend.
She comes back and says,
The fuck did you just say?
You heard me. All those times in my timeline, I asked if I was bugging you. If I was bugging any of you, if you hated me. You would sit there and just listen and say no. But you would never start a conversation besides saying hi. Then most days, if I was lucky enough, I'd get a burn from Malcolm. You all hated me then, and I wouldn't be surprised if you dated Frederick because you felt sorry, and the moment you realized he had issues, you couldn't just say, I hate you, every time more of the truth comes out. Everyone hates me more. Half the time, I can guess that, but other times, I'm completely clueless. I went back hoping that if Mom was alive, not only would she be with us and be happy, but she would have helped me mature and understand the world better.
Jennifer steps up in rage and replies,
You think my parents matured me up? I was a choir girl. And I got thrown into a world where I wasn't allowed to be soft. I was bullied as a kid. I bet you wouldn't have guessed that, or that Tim was shunned by most of the town, so I took him as my brother. Your mom might have been good, but sometimes you have to take that step on your own. And I dated you for as long as I could, thinking that maybe you would get that, but knowing the Frederick, I knew he'd be just as alone as Jedediah Morningside.
She then walks off, leaving him feeling cold. After some walking through S-Mart, finding out in a short conversation which boiled down to Ash having no answers, Madeline and Malcolm having theories, he spotted a massive room full of a dozen people. He looked stunned that they managed to survive with this large of a group. He walks down amongst the people, thinking maybe he'd just stay here and let the others go back. Blend in with the crowd, a dark, thick man in a white long-sleeved shirt, brown pants and shoes, and an awesome voice speaks up, spotting Jedediah, shouting, Jedediah? He recognized the voice as his Uncle Doc, but he thought it was his mind playing tricks on him after another yell. Jedediah. He stopped, realizing it was real. The man turned around, spotting Doc, who ran towards him and him as well. The two hugged tightly, with Jedediah crying, somewhat relieved someone knew him, but confused, he pulls away, saying,
This shouldn't be possible.
Doc says, I know. I woke up here days ago, afraid to ask too many questions after the giant ball in the sky flew over. But I saw you and I couldn't resist. Jedediah says to his Uncle Doc.
How do you remember me? No one should.
I can control my dreams. I'm not fooled by this illusion. Jedediah's face turns to shame as he says,
I'm afraid this isn't an illusion. I really need to talk to you.
We can talk. The two hug tightly for a solid 10 minutes. Back outside, the vehicle parks right across from the S-Mart building with Jarvis hanging on the back of it. He gets off waiting for the now charred corpses to leave with Rufus contacting someone.
Yeah, we need an order of lurkers, and the big ones. Yeah, trust me, none of your toys are gonna get broken. There's something about this place keeping them out. Like someone is putting up a barrier that the Deadites can't break. I can feel it.
Jarvis waits for the very clumsy corpses to walk before limping out to find Jedediah, but then he can hear Henry say, I'm gonna kill that freak for roasting me. Jarvis turns at him hearing Rufus say,
Do what you want, just leave him intact, as the boss said he doesn't want him in pieces.
Jarvis limps towards the corpse, raising his machete, striking his head, spraying yellow gunk everywhere. Edna and Rufus turn around to see Jarvis chopping at Rufus's now truly lifeless remains. Rufus wants to keep moving, but Edna jumps at Jarvis as he stands. Back at S-Mart, Doc listens to Jedediah finish his explanation.
Well, now, I know I can't undo what I did. Part of me thinks that even if I could, Loretta wouldn't live. Part of me doesn't even know if any of this is real. I don't want them to hate me, but I know they do.
Doc nods and asks,
You hate me too, don't you?
As he rubs his head, Doc states, If you become a child psychologist or psychologist in general, one thing you have to learn is that every perspective makes sense. You wanted a better life, there's no shame to admit it. They found out their lives could have been better, you understand that. And the thing is, maybe they don't hate you. Or maybe they do. You can't do anything about that. What matters is how you choose to respond, just like your mom's death. And your sister's life here. Do you embrace the picture you think they think of you? Or do you just go on? Jedediah looks up and says,
So you're saying I should leave them and accept that I'll never get a conclusion? No answer. And that I should just let the end play out?
Doc grabs his shoulder and says, I think you shouldn't let that one moment have painted your life. Much like how here your mistake of alerting everything has painted it. Jedediah sighs and Doc looks at him and says, Why didn't you talk to me about these things? Jedediah responds by saying,
I wanted to solve the questions. I reached out to my coworkers. They didn't care. My father tells me to drop it and move on. I wanted to visit you and Aunt Tracy. But I guess a combo of time and thinking it would be the same shit just made me focus on that one moment and nothing else.
Doc responds, What do you think is the right move? Jedediah sighs and says,
Malcolm and Loretta have suffered enough. I don't know if the world will end or not. I think that even if I'm stuck out here to live alone, they don't deserve it.
He stands up and says,
I need to talk to them.
Wait. He stops, turning around, and Doc holds out something. Jedediah takes it to see 3D glasses with Doc saying, Kruger will use your eyes to fool you, so in your dream you'll use these. Jedediah responds,
Get the fuck out of here.
Trying to hang them back as Doc chuckles. Your mom said the same thing. But they helped her. I'd keep them. Doc rises up and walks off. As Jedediah walks to where he believes they will be at, he spots a familiar nun walking on the upper floors. He puts the 3D glasses in his pocket and hurries upstairs saying,
Sister Helena?
He makes it up seeing her gone. He looks around, then spotting her looking out the window. He hurries over with her saying,
Why, hello.
I'm lost. How did you get here?
She sighs, turns to him.
I go where I'm needed. I left Springwood knowing I had to be here. It seems you've been told the same.
He simply replies.
Actually, I'm giving up on this whole thing. There were no answers and too many lives were lost.
Many more will be lost, I'm afraid.
He looks confused and says,
No, Madeline said the world's not ending. That if it was, we'd be dead already.
Sister Helena sighs and says,
New York.
Beg your pardon?
New York. There's a device there. Built by the person after you. Made to keep this hell intact. And if something like that can be built,
It can be destroyed.
She nods. He looks confused and says,
But how would one know how to build something that powerful?
She answers,
the same book that unleashed these monsters upon the world.
He thinks on it, remembering Ash from the timeline before, and he says,
The Necronomicon.
She nods. He struggles to stand sitting down and thinks.
If that thing was destroyed, it would unleash everything and trigger the whole atmosphere.
Helena then speaks up.
Burn the planet to a cinder. The thing is, only one who has the book can know how to destroy it. But the thing is, the building it lies in tells the devil's lies, making promises of salvation. The son of the president is in search of the book.
He doesn't know. He couldn't know.
He gets up and hurries to the others with Helena saying.
Jedediah,
He stops.
remember what I told you about savoring the good moments.
He nods and says.
Yeah, got ya.
And he keeps running. After several minutes of walking, he couldn't help but want to smoke. It was eating at him, but he made it to where they were seeing some looking different. Malcolm looked depleted. He saw some had a change of clothes. Taffeta had a shirt with a heart and a monster hand. Tim and Jennifer had a shirt with bloody claw marks. Loretta had found a sweatshirt with CRA on it. Malcolm was wearing the same clothes, like he was so tired from this he couldn't care. As Jedediah walked up, Loretta shouted with joy.
Oh, good you're here.
Jedediah stopped as she pulled him closer to the group, sitting him down. She pulls out a Polaroid 600 Sun 600 LMS built-in flash instant film camera. She hands it to some random guy. She must have paid him somehow. She got in place right next to him, and Malcolm. The picture is taken and the Polaroid comes out. She thanks the man and comes back looking at the picture. Jedediah gives her a confused look as she says,
We made it. I caught up on the reading. We were here to find Ash Williams, and we did.
Malcolm responds.
4 answers. Answers we didn't get.
Jedediah sighs and says,
Jennifer, look, I know we agreed that once we did this, we'd never see each other again.
Don't think I'm changing my mind.
I'm not. I was going to ask if you could take Loretta and Malcolm back.
Everyone looks in shock as he says,
They didn't want to do this. If you could play it off as if we got lost and I died, I would be content.
Jennifer looks in front of her and says,
They can come back. I'll put in a good word.
He nods and walks off. Malcolm looking somewhat relieved that this nightmare is over. Loretta confused and angry. As he walks, he spots a man with smokes. It gets to him. He asks,
May I have one?
The man obliges and puts the smoke in his mouth and lights it. Jedediah breathes in deeply and nods, saying,
Thank you.
He sucks on the cigarette as he walks, blowing the smoke out. As he finds a spot, he sits down looking at the cigarette and realizes what he did and replies.
I don't smoke.
Loretta arrives, saying,
What are you doing?
Jedediah turns to her and says,
Smoking?
She confused says,
What? No. What are you doing sending us back?
Jedediah simply replies,
It's not over, but I can't risk losing any more people because of my actions.
She sits next to him and says,
I'm not leaving you.
Jedediah remembers one moment and quickly pulls out his photo of his mother, father, and himself. She looks at the photo. She asks him.
Is that your mom?
He nods. She looks away. He wants to tell her about what her date would be in the other timeline, but he can't. He instead asks.
How do you time travel for me but no one else?
After a minute, she says to him.
I'm not sure. When I relive the night of Dad's death, I feel claws in my skin.
He gives a look of shock, turning to her, rolling up her sleeves, showing marks in her arms, some of them dragging across to her back. The ones that go to the back are fresh scabs. She says,
When you died, I was so angry that when I tried moving, I didn't care when they cut me.
That's when a thought came to his head. I didn't do it, he thinks.
I made the new crew thing. It can enter the timeline just like us, and it used you to make things possible.
She looks more confused as he smokes.
Jebediah, are you hearing yourself?
He blows out smoke, then drops the cigarette on the ground, getting up and stepping on it, saying,
This whole mess is crazy.
He walks away, leaving her alone. He walks alone, thinking about it over and over again. Then he remembers the visions playing in his mind each time when he had changed the timeline. They were visions of things he would discover he saw. His grandfather. He found out about Freddy Krueger. He saw the mask of Jarvis. They met him, the image of a man waking up to a broken world that must have been Ash. But there were several that didn't make sense. One of an old man calling someone a boy. A man claiming to be an explorer, pins all over his head. A woman picking up a phone in what looked like a diner, and another woman on the phone saying, Have you seen the cats yet? A woman hanging herself, saying it's all for you, to some boy named Damien. This wasn't like watching a movie or reading a book. There are parts missing. What if they weren't his memories? He continues on this thought process for a while until half the day has been spent. He walks around, spotting Loretta laying the bed area of the S-Mart, tossing and turning. He walks up to her and asks,
What are you doing?
She simply answers,
Well, I'm gonna stay out here, so I'm gonna try to get used to this.
He replies,
No, you're going home with your boyfriend.
Look, whatever we are, the next day I have to read a book to know about his existence. If he goes, I probably won't even notice. But as much of a jerk as you've been, you're the one person left that I know. And if you go, I'll be confused and scared every day when I wake up.
He sees her sit there tearing up. He relates to this a bit, so he sits on the opposite bed from her and he says,
So you want to tell me about Mom from this timeline?
She stops shuffling and looks at him.
She was a really swingy person. One minute she would praise you, but then the next minute she'd lose her shit and hate you more than anyone else she's met. Dad started to leave more. These days were the worst.
He sighs and says,
Okay, did he ever come back?
He did, but those days were worse than when he split. More arguing, more blaming, then kids started going missing around the neighborhood. And Mom talked about moving, but Dad said the kids had friends. We didn't, by the way.
So why stay?
She sighs and says,
He would have left, but he stayed for Maggie.
Maggie? You're calling our own mother by her first name?
Forgetting the name she had in this timeline, the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He looks at her and replies,
Oh.
He turns away. She then continues,
A few weeks of counseling came and went, and then that hooded figure broke in with those knives for fingers.
Those words echoed. He could only think of Krueger at this point. But she continued,
According to my book, Mom got more quiet. Then another month happened, and then she vanished. My book had me written that maybe she went to Dad's grave and got dragged to hell.
He sighs with the pain of how effed up this timeline was. He then asks,
Did I do anything good?
After a minute she speaks.
1.
He looks over at her as she writes down their conversation. She looks back up and says,
I read that you used to be Mom's eyes and ears for me. I used to hate you for that because you told secrets that Mom would yell at me and belt me for. But then one day, when I blabbed about a crush I had, you promised to keep it secret. And you did. From then until the day Mom went missing, you didn't tell her anything else about my life.
He kinda smirks at that thought, but then it drops after a few seconds as she finishes writing, sets her book down, and asks,
Can you sing that song that Dad would sing to me at bedtime? Maybe that would help me sleep.
He looks confused and says,
I don't know that one.
The Teddy Bear Picnic song?
He stops recognizing that song, but it was one his mother would sing to help him sleep. He nods and says,
All right, but don't judge my singing.
She nods, shutting her eyes as he sings.
If you go out in the woods today, you're sure for a big surprise. If you go out in the woods today, you better go in disguise. For every bear that ever there was gathered there together, because today is the day the teddy bears have their picnic.
He looks at her sound asleep. He nods with some hope on his face and covers her with a blanket. He sits there, spotting Malcolm walking up and sitting next to Loretta, saying,
If she goes with them, I go with. She told me what you had talked to her about, so what's the new info dump you found out?
He rubs his head and says,
I think I know what caused the mess. I didn't change anything massively. The same thing that hunts us is attached to her whenever she relives Dad's death. She mentioned something clawing her, and she showed me the results of these claws, and she talked about a person who killed our dad. It's Kruger. He killed my dad, became the nightmare killer in this world, and has been using Loretta to F around, and when he saw her as a threat, he holds her in that moment every night. Only when I die is she willing to push through.
Malcolm then says,
What about the timeline instantly collapsing that Madeline talked about?
Jedediah retorts,
The person who's after me. They built something to keep this timeline intact. In New York. And get this, if it's destroyed, everything goes. More importantly, whoever's near it is promised answers by destroying it. The president's son has been near it and is looking for the Necronomicon to take it all down. We find that book and warn him against it. We stop the end of the world.
2 questions. 1, where is the Necronomicon? And 2, who told you this?
He sighs, breathes, and answers,
I don't know the first one, and the second is Sister Mary Helena.
Malcolm responds.
A nun told you?
Jedediah nods and Malcolm replies.
How would she know?
Jedediah doesn't want to go into details because he doesn't know where she could be at, so he thinks he'll think he's crazy, so he replies.
My Uncle Doc remembers me. Time travel isn't an exact science. I think at this point we can probably assume she's a psychic.
Malcolm shrugs and says,
We still need to find the book.
He spots Jedediah tapping his feet and he asks,
Do you have a cigarette?
No? Wait, when did you start smoking?
He looks over and says,
Today, but the weirdest thing is that I didn't want one until I woke up, and it's just getting worse. Even funnier than that, Kristen was in my dream before it was in yours, and she died in it, and then I woke up in your dream, and then I woke up and all I want is smokes.
He turns to Malcolm looking dazed and he says,
Look, we'll work this out. Stay close and keep an eye on me. I'm hitting the hay.
He nods as Malcolm lays down. He looks around and says to himself quietly,
It takes around 90 minutes to hit REM.
He looks over and says,
I'm looking for a pack.
And he quickly moves as Malcolm drifts off. Around 60 minutes he makes it to the alcohol section, spotting people smoking and drinking. He asks,
Hey, where'd you find those?
One of them points and he nods, saying,
Thank you.
And hurries, spotting a pack of cigarettes with a Zippo next to them. As he grabs them, he spots Ash damn near drunk, pouring booze down his throat. He feels a bit of pain seeing how this man fell. Back with Malcolm, he tosses and turns in bed, dreaming of his mother and father in front of him. He looks around, seeing his house similar to last time, keeping an eye out, and says,
Look, I'm not who you think I am, but No. I'm Malcolm. I'm not perfect, but I didn't get her killed, and the fact you sent me to Weston Hills because I was different, I deserved love from you guys. And I'm done with you.
He stands there gasping as the mom gets up, holding Malcolm's head in what feels like warmth. He kinda smiles as the mom's face changes from warmth to malice. She screams in a deep voice, with bugs pouring from her mouth and flying into Malcolm's. His eyes open, looking around and walking away, with Loretta spotting him leaving. He walks off far away from everyone else, spotting a door with a gap in it. He looks through, seeing Rufus running from Jarvis. A smile runs across his face and opens the door, letting Jarvis, and he stops chasing him, walking into the building. As he walks in, Malcolm does a small cut on his neck with the poisoned blade. Jarvis dropping to the floor, hallucinating, and after he drops to the floor, Malcolm turns into the hooded figure with 2 clawed gloves and walks off. Rufus walks in, confused, then in rage kicks Jarvis, saying,
This is for my girl.
And then walks in to look for Jedediah. A whoosh being heard from the open door. Jedediah back at the alcohol section hands Ash a cigarette. He looks up and takes it. He holds it out and Jedediah lights it. Ash nods with Jedediah, looks down, puts one in his mouth and lights it up, and after sucking, blowing and pulling it out, and speaks.
Look, I'm sorry about... Nah. Don't. I can't entirely blame it on you. It was your fault messing with time, but I still too much of the potion. It was still me. I shouldn't have taken it on you.
He smokes. He nods, remembering Malcolm.
Shit.
He drops the cigarette, stomps on it, and says,
Sorry again. Enjoy the cigarette. Also, if I hadn't slept the previous night, I would have beaten you.
He then runs off. He makes it back to the bed section, seeing Loretta up, no Malcolm, and he asks,
Where's Malcolm?
She rubs her head and says,
I saw him walk off.
He sighs of relief. Then he can hear screaming. He mutters,
Stay here.
And hurries, spotting 2 hanging bodies with gutted bodies, barely alive. Davy and Raoul. Jedediah runs towards them, but after a few seconds he drops to the ground in pain, looking back up to see them lifeless. Then he can hear more screaming around him as part of the ceiling collapses around him. Ash gets up, seeing people get jumped by tiny jowled-looking people groaning and tearing. Ash aims his shotgun at some and blows away a group of them. Then he aims his gun behind him and shoots a tiny hooded figure, spewing yellow blood everywhere. Back under the rubble, Jedediah gasps, feeling his arm stuck under some rubble, and after finding that out, he looks up at the sky to see a giant silver ball shooting lasers at the building. Jedediah simply remarking,
That's bad.
Then hearing knives clattering to the concrete beams near him, he looks forward to seeing the hooded figure crawling towards him, with him remarketing.
And that's worse.
He pulls hard at his hand, slowly grinding his flesh on the beam and floor, pining him. Back with Jennifer, Tim, and Taffeta sit, starting to hear the screams. Then suddenly a small jowl-looking thing jumps up at Jennifer. She pushes and touzles with them in seconds, shoots it in the head, knocking it back. It flopped on the floor like a stuffed doll filled with jelly. It was when the yellow liquid appeared leaking from its skull. Jennifer knew what was behind this. She states,
Taffeta, Tim, go that way and hide.
Tim wanted to go with Jennifer, but Taffeta pulled him as another laser came from the floating orb in the sky, shaking the earth. Back with Jedediah, he finished pulling out his hand. It was all bloodied. As he gets up and hurries to a small gap, trying to avoid the hooded figure, crawls towards him, unnaturally muttering like a playful elder. He keeps crawling to the hole, seeing Loretta behind it, shouting,
Hurry up!
He squeezes through the hole, hearing the climbing behind him. His pocket cuts open, dropping his picture back on the other side. He immediately feels his pocket turning around to try and reach it, but can't without crawling back, and Loretta pulls him back away from the hole, saying,
All this for a stupid
She is grabbed by the knifed hand and pulled in the hole by the shirt. Jedediah grabs her legs and pulls. It's a tug of war. He pulls back and the figure pulls forward, tearing at her shirt. After a few more pulls, her shirt tears as Jedediah pulls her back through the hole, and a rock from what was left of the ceiling drops down in front of the hole. Jedediah checks over Loretta, asking,
Are you alright? No broken bones? No cuts?
Yes. No.
Good.
He looks at the now sealed up hole and says,
That shouldn't be possible. Unless...
He remembers his father talking in the last timeline he was in.
Usually he possessed most of the people that killed out.
It possessed...
He pulls Loretta up and says,
Come on, I have a plan.
The two run away from the rubble. Back with Jarvis by the door, laying on the floor, remembering the night he killed Pam, the night he was dragged away to that horrible insane asylum, hearing people chant at him.
You dirty little beast.
Over and over again his sister stopped visiting him. And when spending years in the dark, around 2 weeks before Jedediah and his group arrived at the town, a man opened the door to his cell. The light blinded him as the tall man tossed him clothing, his mask and a machete, and says,
It's time now, boy.
And walks away, leaving the man to his devices. Back in present time, Jarvis places his hand on the ground and rises up slowly. Back with Jennifer running and sometimes shooting the Jawa-looking things walking over the corpses of several dozen people, even spotting Madeline using a telekinetic throw to chuck a ball of them into a wall, splatting them like a bug on the windshield. She makes it about 10 feet as another freak sneaks up on her, about to pounce. When a wooden bat strikes it down, she turns around to see Doc smashing its body down with goo splatting on his face. After it's dead, he wipes his face and looks up, saying, Oh, you must be that Jennifer girl Jedediah talks about. He speaks to you in high regard, or do you two not get along here? He sighs, lowering her gun, not even shocked at this point, and replies,
We used to date.
He nods as she walks past him slightly. She spots the charred up Rufus holding Jarvis's machete. He slashes at Jennifer's shoulder and Doc's back. They both drop, with Rufus saying, Jennifer pulls out her gun, unloading every round into him. After the click, Rufus laughs. Doc gets up and swings. Rufus dodges, backing up, kicking him in the knee, wrapping his arm around his throat, pointing the machete at his gut. He looks him in the eyes and says,
Oh, he said you might help me find him.
Doc shakes his head. I'm not helping you for shit. Rufus grins, replying,
Not that type of help.
And plunges the blade into Guy, reaching through his back. Blood leaks from his mouth, and he continues,
Your death will bring him right to me.
He pulls out the blade, leaving him to bleed out, and as Doc drops lying on the ground, he says,
I'll be in software.
And he walks off. Jennifer quickly gets to Doc and takes a dead guy's shirt, wrapping it around his wound. Doc reaches for her hand and shakes his head and says, He cares about you guys. Please keep him safe. He liked when you sang, and like that life leaves his eyes and he is gone. After his passing, Jennifer hears running, seeing Jedediah and Loretta. He stops, spotting Doc. His face turns to sadness as he says,
No.
He quickly grabs Doc and says,
Uncle Doc, come on, I'm here. Don't do this to me. Don't do this to me. No.
He sobs into his dead uncle's shirt. Then he shakes, looking up in rage, spotting the trail of yellow blood. He gets up, walking towards it. Loretta yells out,
What about Malcolm?
It's a trap, you dumbass.
He stops, looking back at Jennifer, and says,
You won't care. As for Malcolm, Loretta, I have shit to deal with.
He walks off, with Loretta asking,
Is he good with fighting without a weapon at all?
Jennifer shakes her head. He makes it to software, making it to a massive line leading to a desk. Rufus jumps down in front of him and chucks the machete, missing him, hitting a shelf behind him. Jedediah looks at him and says,
I thought your boss wanted me.
Rufus nods, saying,
Intact. He never said anything about being alive.
He runs at him, and Jedediah punches him in the face with his right bloodied hand, barely doing anything to Rufus while hurting like hell for him. He is then socked in the jaw, knocking him down. Rufus grabs him by the neck, lifts him up, slamming him into a wall, pinning him there, choking him, and says,
You know, you really had me going for a minute there. All this trouble for a little shrimp like you.
Not noticing the red bloodied hand grabbing the machete out of the wall. Jedediah chuckles as Rufus looks up and says,
What's so funny?
Oh, I was thinking of a joke. Stop me if you heard this one. Jesus walks into a hotel. He hands the innkeeper 3 nails and asks.
It was then the blade punches into Rufus's gut, yellow goo leaking out. It was Jarvis stabbing him. Rufus drops Jedediah and says,
What the fuck?
Jedediah's coughs, grunting out.
He put me up for the night.
He pushes him further and the blade. Watching Jarvis cut upwards through the rest of his body, yellow blood spraying everywhere, even on Jedediah, until he cuts through the head. After the body flaps on the ground, Jarvis slowly, kinda loose and clumsy, turns to him about to attack, but he drops on the ground next to him. Jennifer and Loretta run, and seeing this, Loretta shouts,
What happened?
He looks over, gets up, and says,
One thing at a time.
He then pulls out the roofies and states,
I have an idea.
Back with Ash, he's been shooting the little shits and punching a few of them. He spots in a pile of rubble the hooded Kruger, crawls out of it, knives tapping on the ground. Ash runs at the thing. As it gets up, Ash punches it in the gut with his metal hand, dropping backwards onto a metal bark sticking out of the concrete, stabbing it through. He breathes and ready to finish it, but as he does, a laser shoots down in front of, forcing him to back up, then slowly aims at the figure, blasting it to hell. He breathes a heavy sigh of relief, but right as the blast stops and Madeline chucks a piece of rubble at the Orta shield, making it crush into tiny pebbles on impact, the burnt claw hand pulls the rest of the body off the bar, and first the flesh heals, then the clothes and meat. Seconds, the hood figure looks up and Ash decides to run, and runs the opposite way while it finishes recovering. Back with Taffeta and Tim, they run away to hide from the preceding explosions. Tim turns around, spotting the rubble hitting the shield, spotting some of the debris sliding behind the shield. And he looks back further to see a pillar just above the sentinel standing tall, and he says,
I have an idea.
And runs towards the thing as Taffeta tries grabbing him but misses, shouting,
Your sister will kill me if I don't protect you.
She then grunts and chases after him. Madeline, after chucking rubble at it, sees its laser beam charge up and shoot just in front of her, forcing her to jump. She lands hard on the floor as Ash runs up by her, helping her up, bumping into Jedediah, Jennifer, and Loretta. Right as the upper floor drops next to them, they all run, bumping into Tim and Taffeta with him, and Jennifer yells at her.
What is he doing here?
After hearing clawing at metal, they all run away further, and the S-Mart remains. The group gathers together with Jedediah asking,
So can anyone and everyone tell me what's going on?
Madeline answers first.
That orb is tearing everything and everyone up. That, and it has a shield taking everything I throw at it.
Ash then continues that thought by saying,
Some tiny bastards are jumping around, mauling everyone who avoids the damn thing. Some freak with a hood that can heal from every blow I give it.
Jedediah replies,
That's Malcolm. I have a plan for him.
He holds out the roofies and says,
I take some, go into his dream, bring him out, wake him up, put that thing back in the dream world.
Jennifer asks,
Is that what killed Dean?
He nods.
Then won't you be harmed in the dream world?
Jedediah shrugs and says,
I'll have to fight it off until the drugs wear off.
Madeline answers,
No. You won't be in the medical store a block from here, and within my protection stave should have adrenaline. Shoot that into someone, they wake up pretty quick.
He nods, saying,
Okay, we'll go with that.
Loretta then states,
What about that hooded figure and that masked guy? They both want you dead the most. They could attack you while you're asleep.
He then answers,
I could draw them to each other and let them tear each other to shreds.
Madeline then asks,
Okay, what about the little freaks and the giant orb?
Tim then says,
It only has a shield made for what's in front of it fighting. Anything attacking it when it's not focused on it will crush it, so you distract it under a pillar and two people would be watching you from the monsters and then we'd pull it on top.
Jennifer then asks,
What are you gonna pull it down with?
Ash sighs and asks.
Can any of you drive?
Taffeta and Jennifer raise their hands with Ash saying,
You look good at fighting. You help me protect Sugar Baby.
Pointing at Jennifer and tossing Taffeta keys and says,
1974 Oldsmobile Delta 88. It's yellow. Just by the parking lot. You hurry to it before the Deadites get to it. It's outside the stave. In the trunk is a pulley. Tie it to the rear and the pillar, and when we have it, you pull it.
Jedediah nods and says,
Okay, Loretta, I trust you to remember this because at this point we only have 10 hours of the day left. You wake up Jarvis and bring him to hardware. I'll draw that hooded fucker there.
The group nods and split off as the hooded figure crawls into their hideaway with Jedediah shouting.
Okay, now run. Run like hell!
And they split off. Jedediah moves to the hardware's department, running through the ruins of the store. Loretta makes it back to software, spotting Jarvis alive, but very much weakened. She quickly goes over, kicking at him multiple times. Madeline, Ash, and Jennifer make it to just in front of the pillar on the second floor. Madeline throws a piece of rubble using her powers at the Sentinel. The shield destroys it, and the silver ball floats at her. Ash and Jennifer start seeing the Jawas crawl out from the remaining building. Jennifer and Ash start shooting them as they run at them. Taffeta and Tim make to the parking lot, seeing the Oldsmobile. Taffeta and him run as fast as they can. The sunset, letting the evil start to charge out. She gets to the driver's side, putting in the key, and unlocks it. Tim gets in and Taffeta puts the car in reverse and backs up and starts driving away. From the S-Mart, Tim, confused, says,
We need to head back that way.
She shakes her head and says,
I want to head back. We're heading back to the truck and giving the elder class out location. We shouldn't have been in this mess.
Tim says to her,
We have to head back.
She shakes her head again, continuing to drive away. Loretta keeps kicking at Jarvis until his hand starts clenching the ground. He looks up at Loretta, seeing the faces of the nurses making fun of him. Jarvis grabs his machete and starts swinging at her. She quickly runs, drawing him to where Jedediah is. Jedediah keeps running as the thing jumps around on the wall. He makes it to hardware, hearing the thing climbing around, but he can't see it. He spots some gasoline and starts pouring it all over the place. He pulls out his Zippo, lighting it all up. He stands there waiting, hearing the taping of the claws grow more quiet. Loretta leads Jarvis right to the entrance of the hardware department. She makes it in with Jarvis seconds behind her, and the hooded figure jumps on Loretta, grabbing her leg, pulling her towards her. Jedediah runs to her, only for Jarvis to slash at his side, leaving a nasty gash, forcing him to jump back. Then in seconds, Jarvis slashes at the figure. It gets mad and jumps at Jarvis, who then throws it into the fire. Jedediah picks up Loretta, and the two move to the medical store. Jarvis tries to follow, but as he walks, the figure pulls a rope out of its robes, throwing a noose around his neck, pulling him backwards, and swings him around the room, slamming him into stuff. Back with the trio dealing with the Sentinel, Ash is socking the Jawa-looking things in the face, knocking them backwards, while Loretta shoots as many as she can. Her clip runs out and she reloads one. Jumps at her, she grabs it by the neck with one hand, taking the top, putting it next to the wall, pulling it back until it clicks, then shooting the thing in the head and continuing. Madeline continues to chuck concrete at the orb, but eventually she hears its beam ready to shoot and quickly levitates a bunch of concrete, blocking the blast. Back with Tim and Taffeta as they are now 20 minutes away from the store. Tim has run out of ways to convince her, especially since now Deadite spirits are right behind them. He says,
You know, if the elder class found out about you abandoning your squad, that's treason.
She starts to break out in sweat and does a sharp turn back towards the spirits, feeling the car get slammed around, making it very hard to keep the wheel straight. On the way to the medical store, they see those tiny people running around, running inside the S-Mart, with Jedediah saying,
Where the hell are those things coming from?
and quickly keep moving. They make it inside, quickly tearing through pharmacy. After 10 minutes, Loretta finds a bottle and holds it up, shouting.
I got it!
Jedediah looks up, smiling. Back with the hooded figure swinging around Jarvis, with the noise finally lets him drop, and keeps walking to find Jedediah and Loretta. In seconds, though, it turns around after hearing footsteps, only to be stabbed in the gut, and says, Jarvis then takes a piece of wood and stabs it in the neck. He pulls out the machete and chucks it into a shelf. It drops to the ground, and Jarvis then knocks over the shelf onto it, crushing it, seeing blood spill out like a squashed grape. He stands there for a few seconds, seeing the blood reverse back under the shelf. Then in seconds, after hearing uncomfortable noises, a clawed hand shoots out. Back in the medical store, Jedediah lays down and takes one and says,
You know, I don't know if I'll wake up right away. Maybe aim it for my heart.
She shakes, getting the shot ready. Around 15 minutes later, they see the store is in reach. They make it back in the stave and drive around the rubble to the pillars, seeing the onslaught of the giant orb blasting at the other group. On their way around, Tim spots two silver cylinders sticking out of the ground, seeing those tiny monsters running out of it. Tim says,
Stop here.
She does, and tells her before getting out.
Stay here and don't drive until I get back.
He hurries up to the trunk, grabbing the pulley, ties part of it to the Oldsmobile, and runs with the rest. Back in the burning hardware department, the hoodie figure stabs its claws into Jarvis's shoulder. The combination of blood infection, blood loss, and poison hallucination starts to go limp, but as he was about to drop like a bug, the figure says,
You fucking freak!
And Jarvis's adrenaline pumps him back up, taking his machete, stabs it through the gut, charging it into a boring shelf, and stabs it into the wood. As it screams, burning while healing constantly in pain, he drops on the floor. Jedediah lays there with his eyes shut and says,
I think these pills must be shit because I don't feel...
He looks around, seeing the room he was in, but no Loretta, and he finishes with a slightly sarcastic but confused voice.
anything.
He gets up, thinking to himself,
Okay. You did it before. How did you do it? I don't know. Great.
He thinks for a moment and says,
How did Kristen do it for me?
He thinks for a moment and says,
It can't be as simple as saying Malcolm.
In seconds, he hears the walls crackle, and he turns around, seeing the outside of a house. Recognizing the door, he says,
Okay, this is it. Go find Malcolm and figure out how to wake him up.
He teaches for the knob as he says, opening the door.
No matter what!
He drops for what feels like a 1,000-foot drop, landing in a darkened abyss of black sand, floating about, showing memory after memory, and says,
And I thought his house was fucked up before.
He looks around and shouts,
Malcolm!
He walks around calling. He keeps walking, seeing the strains of memories come from the darkened floor like a stream of ash. He decides to try Doc's 3D glasses idea, but as he pulls them out, he can hear a familiar voice from his timeline.
You know I'm not an outgoing person.
He turns at one of the streams of ash and says,
Jennifer?
Back in the real world, as Ash is being tackled by these lurkers, Jennifer starts feeling tired and stumbles backwards. She makes it to a room nice and quiet, then falls through the floor like a person passing through air. She lands on Jedediah, slamming him into the ground. She confusingly stumbles around, getting up, and says,
What the fuck?
Jedediah gets up instantly and says,
How did you get here?
She responds,
What do you mean, how did I get in here? I don't even know where here is.
What are you doing here? What are you doing?
He slams his hands on his face and says in fear,
You can't be here right now. I'm not messing around. You cannot be here right now.
She looks at him and simply says,
Where even am I?
He stumbles back and answers,
Malcolm's dreams. Or what's left of them anyways.
He looks at his hand, realizing the glasses are gone. He starts to look around for them, and even digging in the ground, which felt gooey, he digs as long as he can with Jennifer asking,
What are you doing?
In seconds, he feels his body start getting pulled in. Jennifer holds out her hand and grabs his left hand, trying to pull him out, but she starts getting pulled in too. They keep getting sucked in until all you would see is the same dark floor. Back in the burning room, the flames still engulfed the clawed beast, it screaming in pain, pinned to the shelf, but it stopped screaming in pain, sensing something different. If you could see past the flames, you would probably notice a smile on its face as it says,
"Sleep tight, Freddy."
It grabs at the machete, pulling at it slowly, screams louder than ever before as it pulls. Tim makes it TOF the pillar, seeing Ash shoot a couple of more lurkers. He spots Tim and says,
What the fuck took you so long?
While Tim was hooking up the pulley, and says,
Taffeta,
they hook it up and tighten it with Tim saying,
I need the ball more that way.
Pointing in front of him, and Ash asks,
Why?
Tim responds,
Just do it.
And hurries back to the Oldsmobile. Ash turns to Madeline, throwing rocks at the thing, and shouts,
Sugar baby, move it more that way.
She turns back and nods. Lifting a rock so heavy her brain starts to hurt, and she chucks it at the thing, knocking it back a bit. Ash sees more of the lurkers crawl out, and he takes off his metal hand. They get closer as a revving noise is heard, seeing Ash swap his hand for the chainsaw, saying to them,
Come get some.
As he charges at them, slashing away, yellow blood spraying everywhere. Jedediah opens his eyes, looking around and shouting,
Jennifer!
Clawing at the walls, then hearing her voice.
That was nice, but you didn't have to do that.
He turns around, calling out,
Jennifer, it's me. I'm right here.
He starts slowly walking through the mucky tunnels, only being lit by the light in front of him, always slightly out of reach. With Jennifer in a similar situation, she looks around, shouting,
Jedediah.
She could hear a voice similar to his, but younger, saying,
I would like to invite you guys to lunch at the Cravery.
She then heard a voice she didn't recognize saying,
You know I'm not an outgoing person.
She gets up, seeing a light in front of her just out of reach, and follows. Jedediah keeps calling out,
Just stay still, alright? I'm here.
Then he can hear her saying,
I don't feel in the mood of talking today, Frederick.
Then he can hear his voice.
Was it something I did?
He keeps walking and finally makes it to a hall well lit, seeing Jennifer talking to the alternate version of himself, her saying,
It's just everything, okay. I've been on watch for 3 weeks and I just can't take another session right now.
Frederick replies,
Look, if you hate me, you should just say so.
She snaps back.
See, why is that always your response when I don't want to talk? I can't do this anymore with you always complaining about your life, your sister, your dad, and mom always fighting. I just can't anymore.
She walks away with him, asking,
Please, just tell me. Is that a yes? I need to know. I can't keep not getting an answer.
She turns back and says,
My answer has always been no. If you can't accept that, then yes.
She walks away. The room goes dark and his face feels wet. The tears stream downward. He then breathes in and says,
No, I don't care if she hates me. No, she didn't hate me. I hate myself. I won't let her die because of my self-pity.
Then something weird happens and he starts to glow up. He looks at his hands and legs, saying,
This must have been one of those other guy's powers. I wonder what the other one was.
Randomly, he sees a candy cane form in his left hand. He raises it up and says,
That's pathetic.
He chucks it to the gooey wall and smashes it to bits, revealing another passageway. He runs to it. Back in the real world, in the burning room, the machete drops on the ground, the blood leaving it back towards the burning figure, slowly regrowing its flesh and clothes. It looks at Jarvis and kicks him, then runs out of the room. Back in the dream world, Jennifer finally catches up to the light, seeing Jedediah as a young preteen, sighing, and replies.
Hey, but what about you guys?
Malcolm shrugs and says,
My aunt wants me to get back home right after.
Tim simply answers.
Yeah.
Jedediah shrugs and says,
Okay. See you Monday.
and he shakes their hands, then leaves. The white light fades into what appears to be the next day. Jedediah walking down the street, his eyes set on the crave, and he gets to the door, spotting Jennifer, Malcolm, and Tim all having ice cream at a table. He steps back and says,
Nah. Sure. They hate me.
and walks off. Jennifer starts to see his pain leaking from her right eye, and wiping away the tears, seeing him make it home, hearing his father shout.
Oh, we had a call here from.
He doesn't acknowledge him. He keeps walking up the stairs to his room and listens to music. Then Jennifer, about to turn away, sees his nightly dreams start to play out in the light. Back in the real world in the medical store, Loretta sits there waiting for something to happen to give her the cue, but then she hears the claws and knows what's happening. She puts the shot in her pocket and grabs Jedediah, dragging him to hide him from it. The thing jumps to where they were not, seeing Loretta hiding Jedediah behind the pharmacy stand. Back in the dream world, Jennifer turns around to walk back the way she came to see if there was another path. Then suddenly she hears Malcolm call out,
Help!
She runs, bumping into Jedediah. They stand there for a minute, not saying anything. She wants to talk about what she saw. He doesn't, and quickly moves, shouting,
Malcolm, I'm on my way.
She keeps up, following the light coming from Jedediah's body. Back in the store, the hooded figure tears through the store, Loretta looking over at Jedediah. Then in seconds her eyes shut, and her head drops. As the hooded figure keeps digging around, then in seconds it's knocked backwards, with Loretta teleporting in front of it. The figure chuckles and stands up. Loretta holds out her slowing down time. She runs up to it, socking it in the jaw, then kicking it in the gut. Tim makes it back to the Oldsmobile, hops in, and shouts,
Drive!
Taffeta punches the gas, pulling the rope until the car can't move. The wheels spin out of control. Back at the pillar, Ash sees the rope being pulled and the pillar starting to crack. He chops down another set of lurkers. He pops back on his metal hand and punches the pillar just below the rope, making it crack more. The pillar starts to fall forward. Ash shouts,
Run!
Madeline throws another rock at the sentinel and jumps out of the way, and the pillar crushes it flat. Then it keeps dropping, landing on the cylinders, with the lurkers coming with the Oldsmobile driving forward, then turning left to avoid the medical store. While fighting the figure, Loretta looks up, seeing the roof crash, and she jumps out of the way, avoiding the pillar crushing her. Back in the dream world, Jedediah keeps running and crashing through walls via the candy cane. Jennifer begging Jedediah.
You can't keep running through here, you don't know where you're going.
He doesn't care and keeps going as Jennifer shouts,
Jedediah Morningside, you listen to me.
He stops, breathing intently as she says,
We need to calm down.
He turns to her and says,
Malcolm is trapped. I need to find him right now before he hurts anyone. I made a mistake, or I didn't, but even if I didn't, I promised to watch him sleep, and I didn't keep an eye on him because I ran to get off Smokes. Now he's in trouble, and I need to fix this mistake, and no one in this entire universe is going to help me.
He walks past her as she says confidently,
Well, I'm helping you.
He stands still, feeling somewhat relieved. She then says,
I have this thing in my dreams that helps me get through a nightmare. I can hear the monsters and tell where they are. Maybe I could use it to find Malcolm. I heard him call out earlier, so maybe.
He turns back and nods to her. She listens deeply again and hears,
Stop! You'll kill her.
She points, and Jedediah turns in the direction and smashes at the wall. Back in the real world, Loretta wakes up looking around at the mess of rubble and simply says,
That went well.
In seconds, the hooded figure rises from behind her, grabs her by the arm, and throws her across the room. Back in the dream world, a cage made of memories holds Malcolm's soul inside. The wall in front of it crashes open, and both Jennifer and Jedediah charge through. They make it to the cell. And Jedediah starts smashing at the cage with the candy cane, but every crack just fixed itself up. Back in the real world, the figure jumps on Loretta, aiming its left claw at her neck with her shouting.
Malcolm, please wake up!
It raises up with her saying,
Malcolm, every time I've seen you today, it's like torture. The good type. Every moment I see you, I feel like a triangle, and I wish I could remember every moment with you.
In seconds, it's handshakes. Blood leaks from the glove, dripping down. Back in the dream world, Jedediah hits the box again. The crack doesn't vanish this time. He looks at Jennifer, smiles, and he hits it again with her joining in, smashing at the glass. The figure backs off, dropping to the floor, its hand reverting back to the knifed stump. The leather clothing and hood vanish to show a now unconscious Malcolm. Back in the dream world, they break open the box, letting Malcolm free, and he drops in to catch him as the house reforms back to the less nightmare-inducing house it once was. They all look at each other, laughing as the hooded figure pops up in front of them, floating enraged, but then it spots Jedediah. It utters out. Loretta quickly pulls out the adrenaline and shoots it directly into Jedediah's heart. Back in the dream world, Jedediah feels weird as the other two look at him as he fades, calling out,
Malcolm! Jennifer!
He wakes up shouting,
No!
He looks around in a daze. He spots Malcolm and tells Loretta,
Get his ass up!
And he hurries out, jumping over the rubble in the building. He follows the pillar into the S-Mart. Back in the dream world, the hooded figure telekinetically slams Malcolm into a wall that, in combo of being possessed, he can't get up. Jennifer jumps up after grabbing the axe near the fireplace, but is frozen in air with the hooded figure uttering out. The claws open up. Jedediah makes it to Madeline, Tim, Taffeta, and Ash, with him asking,
Have you guys seen Jennifer?
Ash replies,
Yeah, she was asleep in that room. I assumed she was knocked unconscious, so I put her on the couch after the fight was over.
He hurries over to the room, hearing screaming and slamming around. He opens the door with Jennifer's body being slammed around, and as he screams,
Jennifer!
Her chest is cut open, blood spilling everywhere. He hurries over to her. Seeing her eyes open, she mutters out, He yells at the others,
Help!
She pulls his face back and says,
I forgive you. But you have to let go.
Her body goes limp, and suddenly he feels a surge flow in him. And he knows she's gone. He starts sobbing, hugging her lifeless body. Back in the dream world, Malcolm lies on the floor looking up, seeing the hooded figure get closer, claws ready to strike, saying,
Ready for round two, puppet?
He shakes his head as a tall man bursts into the door, grabbing it by the neck. Suddenly, another 2 cylinders pop up and the man tosses it in. The cylinders vanish. The man turns around with Malcolm, saying,
Thank you.
The tall man says,
Foolish child, that wasn't a permanent fix. Your end approaches, but it is not yet. I keep you alive only to lead him to where the Necronomicon is.
He then kneels down, pressing his thumb to his head. He feels nothing but pain, screaming. Then he wakes up to Loretta, and she hugs him and her back tightly. Hours later, around the early next morning, after burying the bodies from the S-Mart camp, Jedediah sits next to Jennifer's grave. Loretta sits next to him.
You know her? You haven't moved since you buried her.
He wipes his face.
We were close. Loretta, why don't you go wait with Malcolm?
Loretta hands Jedediah the photo she took, saying,
She's in it along with him.
He, trying to remain with what little joy he has left, says,
Ask him out sometime, sunshine.
She chuckles out of nervousness and says,
Where has this Frederick been?
He then taps at her book and says,
This should help.
She looks down, taking her book to begin reading. He looks at the photo. He spots himself slightly burnt and chuckles.
You dropped it in the flame.
Then he looks at Jennifer next to Tim and smiles, but then he notices something her shirt, for slashes on it right on her chest right where she had been cut before she bled out. Tim has the same shirt, 4 slashes. Taffeta has a heart on her shirt. He looks at Malcolm, seeing several rebar poles behind him looking like they were sticking out of him. He looks at Loretta, seeing nothing at first, but then he notices a tear in her shirt on her side. He thinks to himself,
This probably means nothing, but with everything else going on, I doubt it.
He gets up to meet up with the others. He walks up with Ash saying,
Welp, our home's gone.
Jedediah says,
You head down that road, there's an armored truck with a working radio. Anyone want to go with him, you're free to do so now.
Everyone looks at him.
I can't put your lives on the line any more than I have.
For a solid minute everyone is silent until Taffeta is like,
Well, see ya.
Tim stops her and says,
When they find out you left us.
She steps back with Malcolm saying,
I told you about the dream, but you wouldn't even know where to look. I do.
Loretta steps up and says,
I wrote it here that I'd be going no matter what.
Tim steps up saying,
My sister died saving you. What kind of brother would I be if I didn't try to help you save the world?
Jedediah smirks a bit, but with shame on his eyes Ash speaks up.
Well, you can have the Oldsmobile. She was banged up, but she'll get you where you need to go.
Madeline steps up and says,
When you find the book, recite these words, Klaatu Barada Nikto.
After a goodbye, the 2 groups part ways, with the Youngbloods taking the Oldsmobile. Not noticing in the hearse a now patched up Jarvis starts the vehicle driving after them. After hours of walking to the truck, Madeline takes the radio hearing. Youngbloods, are you there? We need a location. Ash looks out into the road, remembering his friends, his sister, his lover. He turns over the radio as Madeline says,
Hello, this is Madeline Rothschilд.
Hello, are the Youngbloods there? What is your location? Ash takes the radio and continues.
This is Ashley J. Williams, a smart clerk.
He stands there thinking about what he will say next.